In the quiet heart of rural Georgia, where the air carried the sweet scent of pine and the earthy aroma of freshly tilled soil, there stood a small but sturdy farmhouse. It was surrounded by fields that stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with rows of vegetables, patches of wildflowers, and the occasional scarecrow swaying gently in the breeze. This land had been in the Williams family for nearly a century, passed down from generation to generation like a precious heirloom. At 93 years old, Margaret Williams was its current caretaker, a woman whose strength and resilience had kept the farm alive through decades of hardship and triumph. Margaret's life had not been an easy one. Born into a sharecropping family during the Great Depression, she had grown up knowing the value of hard work and determination. Her parents had worked tirelessly to buy this land when she was just a child, saving every penny they earned until they could finally call it their own. Over the years, Margaret had poured her heart and soul into the farm, nurturing it through droughts, storms, and economic downturns. Every blade of grass, every tree, and every inch of soil held a memory of laughter, tears, and the sacrifices her family had made to keep it thriving. To her, the farm wasn't just property. It was a symbol of everything her ancestors had fought for after emancipation, a testament to their dreams and struggles. Despite her age, Margaret remained fiercely independent. She woke before dawn each day to tend to her animals and crops, moving slowly but steadily. Her hands, wrinkled and weathered from years of labor, still knew how to plant seeds, pull weeds, and harvest vegetables with precision. In the evenings, she would sit on her porch watching the sun dip below the horizon as the cicadas sang their nightly symphony. The farm was her sanctuary, a place where she felt connected to her roots and to the generations that had come before her. She often spoke to her plants, whispering words of encouragement as if they were old friends. "You've got to keep growing," she'd say, "just like we did." But life on the farm wasn't entirely peaceful these days. Strange things had begun happening over the past few months, things that made Margaret uneasy. Cars she didn't recognize would drive slowly past her property, their occupants staring intently at her land. Footsteps could sometimes be heard crunching through the woods at night, though no one ever appeared when she went to investigate. Then came the notes. They started appearing under her door or tucked into the mailbox, typed letters demanding that she sell her land. The messages were polite at first, almost businesslike, offering what seemed like generous sums of money. But when Margaret ignored them, the tone shifted. The notes became more aggressive, filled with thinly veiled threats. "Sell now, or you'll regret it," one read. Another warned, "This is your last chance." Margaret tried to brush them off, telling herself they were just empty words meant to scare her. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker was brewing. The turning point came one crisp autumn afternoon when 3 men approached her house. Margaret was sitting on her porch shelling peas, humming an old hymn to herself, when she noticed them walking up her driveway. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a shaved head and tattoos snaking up his neck, introduced himself as Jackson. He spoke in a voice that was calm, but carried an undercurrent of menace. "Mrs. Williams," he began, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We've been trying to get in touch with you about selling this land. It's prime real estate, and we're willing to pay top dollar." Margaret set her bowl of peas aside and stood up, squaring her shoulders despite the fear bubbling in her chest. "I already told you boys I'm not interested," she replied, firmly. "This land has been in my family longer than you've been alive. It's not for sale." Jackson's smile faded, replaced by a scowl. "You don't understand, ma'am. This isn't a request. Either you sell to us, or we'll make sure you regret staying." His companions shifted uncomfortably behind him, glancing at each other as if unsure whether to back him up or step away. For a moment, Margaret felt a wave of panic wash over her. She was just an old woman, alone on a vast piece of land with no one nearby to hear her if trouble arose. But then she remembered all the battles her family had fought to keep this farm, and all the times she herself had refused to give up, no matter how hard things got. Summoning every ounce of courage she possessed, she looked Jackson straight in the eye and said, "I've faced worse than you in my time, young man. You can try to scare me all you want, but I'm not going anywhere. The standoff lasted only a few more minutes before Jackson and his men turned and walked away, muttering under their breath. But Margaret knew this wasn't the end. These weren't ordinary criminals. They were part of a local gang that had been wreaking havoc across the county, using intimidation and violence to force people off their land. She had heard stories about them from her neighbors who whispered about burned barns, vandalized equipment, and families driven away in the dead of night. Now, it seemed, they had set their sights on her. That evening, as Margaret sat at her kitchen table eating a simple supper of cornbread and collard greens, she picked up the phone to call her son, Michael. He was her only child, a decorated Navy SEAL who had joined the military at 18 and risen through the ranks with remarkable speed. Though he lived thousands of miles away serving his country in some of the most dangerous places on Earth, their bond remained unshakable. They spoke every week, exchanging updates about their lives and sharing stories from their respective worlds. Tonight, however, Margaret's voice trembled as she recounted what had happened earlier that day. Michael listened intently, his jaw tightening with each word. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Mom, I'm coming home." Margaret protested at first, insisting she could handle things on her own. But Michael wouldn't hear it. "I didn't join the Navy to let someone threaten my family," he said firmly. "You raised me to stand up for what's right, and that's exactly what I'm going to do." As Margaret hung up the phone, she felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her: relief, pride, and a lingering sense of unease. She knew Michael was capable of handling whatever came his way. His training and experience had prepared him for the toughest challenges imaginable. But she also worried about putting him in harm's way. This wasn't a war zone overseas. It was her home, the place where she had hoped to live out her final years in peace. Still, as she climbed into bed that night, she allowed herself to feel a small measure of hope. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. Little did she know her son's arrival would change everything, not just for her, but for the entire community. The battle for her farm was far from over, but with Michael by her side, Margaret felt ready to fight. After all, the Williams family had never backed down from a challenge before, and they weren't about to start now. Michael Williams arrived at his mother's farm just 2 days after their phone call, stepping out of a rented SUV with the same military precision that defined every aspect of his life. His broad shoulders and athletic build were unmistakable. Even in civilian clothes, and his sharp eyes scanned the property with practiced efficiency, Margaret stood on the porch, wiping her hands on an apron as she watched him approach. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, mother and son reunited under circumstances neither had anticipated. Then Michael broke into a wide grin, opening his arms to embrace her. "I told you I'd come," he said, his voice warm but firm. "No one messes with my mom." Margaret hugged him tightly, feeling a surge of relief wash over her. She had always been proud of Michael, from the day he enlisted in the Navy to the countless missions he had completed as a SEAL. But now, seeing him here on her land, ready to stand by her side, she felt something deeper, a profound gratitude for the bond they shared. Still, she couldn't help but worry. "These aren't ordinary people, Michael," she warned as they walked inside. "They're dangerous." Michael nodded, already thinking several steps ahead. "I know, Mom. That's why we're going to do this smartly. We won't let them intimidate us, but we also won't underestimate them." He sat down at the kitchen table, pulling out a notebook and pen. "Tell me everything that's happened so far, the notes, the visits, anything unusual." As Margaret recounted the events leading up to Jackson's visit, Michael listened intently, jotting down details and asking pointed questions. His demeanor was calm but focused, like a soldier planning his next move. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "First things first," he said, standing up. "We need to secure this place. If they think they can scare us off, we'll show them otherwise." Over the next few hours, Michael transformed the farm into a fortress. Using tools from the shed, he reinforced doors and windows, ensuring they could withstand forced entry. He installed motion-activated lights around the perimeter of the property, making it nearly impossible for anyone to approach unnoticed. Then he set up security cameras at key points, near the driveway, along the fence line, and overlooking the fields. These devices were discreet but highly effective, capable of recording clear footage even in low light. Michael explained to Margaret how they worked, showing her how to check the live feed on her phone. "This way we'll always know who's coming and going," he said, "and if anything happens, we'll have proof." But Michael didn't stop there. Drawing on his military training, he created a defensive strategy tailored to the farm's layout. He identified potential weak spots, such as blind corners or areas where intruders could hide, and devised ways to address them. He cleared brush from around the house, eliminating hiding places, and marked escape routes in case of emergency. He even taught Margaret basic self-defense techniques, though he assured her he wouldn't let it come to that. "Just in case," he said with a reassuring smile. "You're tougher than most people give you credit for, Mom." By the time night fell, the farm felt different. Not vulnerable, but fortified. Margaret marveled at how quickly Michael had taken charge, turning chaos into order. Yet she couldn't shake the nagging fear that the gang would return, angrier and more determined than before. Her worries proved justified sooner than either of them expected. The following morning, as Margaret watered her garden and Michael inspected the newly installed security system, 3 trucks roared down the driveway, kicking up clouds of dust. Jackson and his crew stepped out, their faces hard and menacing. They had brought reinforcements this time. More men, all dressed in dark clothing and wearing scowls that matched their leaders. Jackson strode toward the house, stopping just short of the porch. "Looks like you've got backup now," he sneered, glancing at Michael. "Doesn't matter, you're outnumbered." Michael stepped forward, his presence commanding despite his casual stance. He was dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, but there was no mistaking the authority in his posture, or the intensity in his gaze. "Let's get one thing straight," he said, his voice steady and measured. "This is my family's land. You don't belong here, and you're not welcome. If you try anything, you'll regret it." Jackson laughed, though it lacked humor. "Big talk for someone who doesn't know what he's dealing with. You think your fancy gadgets are going to stop us?" He gestured to his men, who spread out across the yard, trying to appear intimidating. But Michael didn't flinch. Instead, he crossed his arms and met Jackson's stare head-on. "You picked the wrong family to mess with," Michael replied, his tone icy. "I've faced worse than you in places you wouldn't last 5 minutes in. So why don't you turn around and leave before things get ugly?" For a moment, tension crackled in the air like electricity. The gang members exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unprepared for Michael's unwavering confidence. Jackson clenched his fists, visibly struggling to maintain control. Finally, he spat on the ground and turned away, motioning for his crew to follow. As their trucks disappeared down the driveway, Michael exhaled slowly, his body relaxing slightly. That wasn't the end, he muttered under his breath. It was just the beginning. He spent the rest of the day reviewing footage from the security cameras, analyzing the gang's movements and identifying patterns. Each vehicle was captured clearly, its license plate number recorded. Michael made notes about the men's behavior, noting who seemed to be in charge and who appeared hesitant. He also reached out to local law enforcement, sharing what he had learned and urging them to take the threat seriously. Though the police had been dismissive in the past, Michael's military background and detailed evidence caught their attention. A detective promised to look into the matter further, though Michael knew they couldn't rely solely on outside help. Meanwhile, Margaret continued her daily routines, finding comfort in familiar tasks. She baked pies, tended to her chickens, and planted new rows of vegetables, drawing strength from the rhythm of the land. Yet she couldn't ignore the shadow looming over her peaceful existence. Every creak of the wind, every rustle in the bushes made her heart race. At night she lay awake, listening for sounds of trouble. It was during these quiet moments that she found herself reflecting on her life, the struggles she had overcome, the sacrifices she had made, and the legacy she hoped to leave behind. She thought about her parents, who had worked themselves to the bone to buy this land, and her grandparents, who had endured unimaginable hardships during slavery. This farm was more than just dirt and crops. It was a symbol of freedom, resilience, and hope. And she wasn't about to let anyone take it away. Michael, too, found himself deeply affected by the situation. Growing up, he had always admired his mother's strength and determination. Now, seeing her face this challenge head-on, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Protecting her wasn't just about defending their property. It was about honoring their family's history and standing up against injustice. He spent long hours researching laws related to land ownership and harassment, determined to understand every legal avenue available to them. He consulted with lawyers, gathered documentation of the gang's threats, and began building a case that would hold up in court. His military experience came in handy as he approached the situation strategically, treating it like a mission with clear objectives and contingency plans. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Margaret and Michael sat together on the porch. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine. For a while, neither of them spoke, content to watch the stars appear one by one. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. "You remind me of your grandfather," she said softly. "He was a fighter too, never backed down no matter how tough things got." Michael smiled, touched by the comparison. "I learned from the best," he replied, nodding toward her. "You've taught me what it means to stand your ground, Mom. I'm not going anywhere until this is over." Margaret reached over and patted his hand. "Neither am I," she said firmly. "This land has seen worse, and so have we. Together, we'll get through this." Their resolve only grew stronger in the days that followed. Michael continued fortifying the farm, adding layers of security and refining their defense strategy. He reached out to neighbors, many of whom had experienced similar harassment from the gang, and encouraged them to document incidents and report them to authorities. Slowly but surely, a network of support began to form, with farmers banding together to resist the gang's intimidation tactics. Margaret played her part by hosting meetings at the farm, offering coffee and cookies while Michael outlined their plan of action. Her wisdom and warmth brought people together, reminding them that they weren't alone. Yet despite their efforts, the threat loomed larger than ever. The gang's attempts to drive them off escalated, growing bolder and more destructive. One night they cut the power lines leading to the farm, plunging the property into darkness. Another time, they sabotaged the irrigation system, leaving Margaret's crops parched and wilting. Each attack tested their patience and resolve, but Michael and Margaret refused to give in. With every setback, they adapted, finding new ways to protect themselves and counteract the gang's schemes. The days that followed were a tense dance between preparation and provocation. Michael and Margaret knew the gang wouldn't back down easily, but neither could they have predicted how far Jackson and his crew would go to claim the land. The sabotage continued, growing more brazen with each attempt. One morning, Margaret woke to find her chicken coop vandalized. Doors ripped off their hinges, feathers scattered across the yard, and several of her hens missing. It was a cruel blow, not just because the chickens provided eggs and companionship, but because it felt like a direct attack on her way of life. She stood in the wreckage, her hands trembling as she clenched the edge of her apron. Michael arrived moments later, alerted by the security cameras. His jaw tightened as he surveyed the damage, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. "They're testing us," he said quietly, kneeling to examine a broken lock. "Trying to wear us down." Margaret nodded, though tears welled in her eyes. "I know," she whispered, "but we can't let them win." That afternoon, Michael reinforced the remaining coops and installed additional cameras around the animal pens. He also set up tripwires connected to alarms, ensuring any intruder would trigger an immediate alert. Yet even as he worked tirelessly to fortify the farm, he couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. The gang's actions had shifted from harassment to outright destruction, signaling a dangerous escalation. Michael decided it was time to take proactive measures. He reached out to a former Navy SEAL colleague named Ryan, who now worked as a private security consultant. Over a secure video call, Michael explained the situation in detail, sharing footage of the gang's activities and outlining their tactics. Ryan listened intently, offering advice based on his own experience dealing with organized crime. "You need to think like them," Ryan said. "Anticipate their next move before they make it, and document everything. You'll need evidence, if this goes to court." With Ryan's guidance, Michael refined his strategy. He created detailed maps of the property, marking potential entry points in high-risk areas. He also began tracking the gang's movements more systematically, noting patterns in their visits and identifying key members. Each piece of information brought him closer to understanding their motives and predicting their actions. What he discovered was chilling. The gang wasn't acting alone. They were working on behalf of a larger organization, a real estate development company looking to buy up rural land for a massive commercial project. This wasn't just about intimidation. It was about profit. Armed with this knowledge, Michael approached local authorities again, this time with irrefutable proof. He presented them with timestamps, vehicle registrations, and recorded threats, building a case that was impossible to ignore. The detective assigned to the case promised to escalate the matter, involving state investigators and federal agencies. But Michael knew bureaucracy moved slowly, and they couldn't afford to wait. He needed to act now. Meanwhile, Margaret continued to hold her ground, refusing to let fear dictate her life. She repaired the chicken coop herself, hammering nails with surprising strength for someone her age. Neighbors stopped by to offer support, bringing supplies and helping clean up the mess. Their solidarity reminded Margaret of the power of community, a lesson she passed on to Michael. "We're stronger together," she told him one evening as they sat on the porch. "If we stand united, they won't stand a chance." Inspired by her words, Michael organized a meeting at the local church, inviting farmers and residents who had been targeted by the gang. Dozens showed up, eager to share their stories and seek solutions. Michael spoke passionately, urging them to document every incident and report it to authorities. He also proposed forming a neighborhood watch program, with volunteers patrolling the area and sharing information through a shared communication network. The idea was met with enthusiasm, and within days the group had established a system to monitor suspicious activity. But the gang wasn't idle. Sensing resistance, they launched their most aggressive assault yet. Late one night, as rain poured down in sheets, Michael received an alert from the farm's security system. Someone had breached the perimeter near the north field. Grabbing a flashlight and his phone, he rushed outside, careful to stay hidden as he approached the source of the disturbance. Through the darkness, he spotted figures moving among the crops, their silhouettes illuminated briefly by flashes of lightning. They were armed with tools, deliberately damaging the irrigation system and trampling rows of vegetables. Michael didn't confront them directly. Instead, he activated the farm's floodlights, bathing the field in bright white light. Caught off guard, the gang members froze, squinting against the glare. Michael used the moment to record their faces and license plates with his phone, capturing clear evidence of their crimes. Then, using a bullhorn he'd purchased earlier, he called out, "This is private property. Leave now, or I'm calling the police." The gang hesitated, clearly unprepared for such a bold response. After a tense standoff, they retreated to their vehicles and sped away, leaving behind muddy footprints and shattered equipment. Michael immediately contacted the authorities, providing them with the footage and descriptions of the suspects. By morning, news of the incident had spread throughout the community, further galvanizing support for Margaret and Michael's cause. Yet the victory was short-lived. The gang retaliated with renewed fury, targeting not just the Williams farm but other properties in the area. Barns were set ablaze, fences torn down, and livestock released into the wild. The violence escalated rapidly, forcing many families to abandon their homes. Margaret watched in horror as her neighbors packed up their belongings, defeated and afraid. "It's like they're trying to drive us all out," she said bitterly during one of their late-night talks. Michael nodded grimly. "They are," he replied. "But we're not going anywhere, not you, not me, not anyone else willing to fight back." Determined to turn the tide, Michael devised a bold plan. With Ryan's help, He coordinated with law enforcement to set up a sting operation. Using decoy messages and false leads, they lured the gang to the farm under the pretense of negotiating a land deal. The trap was carefully orchestrated, with undercover officers positioned strategically around the property. When Jackson and his men arrived expecting an easy victory, they were instead surrounded and arrested on multiple charges, including trespassing, vandalism, and attempted arson. The GUR arrests sent shockwaves through the community. For months, the gang had operated with impunity, believing no one would dare challenge them. Now their leaders were behind bars, and their empire was crumbling. Local news outlets covered the story extensively, highlighting Margaret and Michael's bravery and the role of community solidarity in bringing the criminals to justice. The Williams farm became a symbol of resilience, drawing visitors from neighboring counties who wanted to learn how they had fought back. As the dust settled, Margaret and Michael reflected on everything they had endured. The farm bore scars, broken fences, damaged crops, and memories of sleepless nights, but it remained standing, a testament to their determination. Margaret often walked the fields, running her fingers over new shoots of corn and beans, marveling at their ability to grow despite the chaos around them. "Life finds a way," she murmured one day, smiling at Michael. "Just like we did." Michael, too, found himself changed by the experience. His military training had prepared him for combat, but this battle had taught him something different: the importance of protecting what truly mattered. He realized that courage wasn't just about facing danger. It was about standing up for your values even when the odds seemed insurmountable. And as he looked at his mother, still tending her garden with the same quiet strength that had inspired him since childhood, he knew they had achieved something extraordinary. Their journey wasn't over. There would be trials ahead: rebuilding fences, replanting crops, and healing the wounds left by the gang's attacks. But for now, they allowed themselves a moment of peace, sitting together on the porch as the sun dipped below the horizon. The cicadas sang their nightly symphony, and the scent of fresh earth filled the air. Margaret leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes with a contented sigh. "We did it, Michael," she said softly. "We held our ground." "Yes, we did," Michael replied, his voice filled with pride. "And we always will." The aftermath of the gang's arrest brought a mix of relief and uncertainty to the Williams farm. For Margaret, it was as if a heavy storm cloud had finally lifted, allowing sunlight to warm the earth again. She walked through her fields each morning, inspecting the damage with a critical eye but also noticing signs of renewal. Tiny green shoots pushing through the soil where crops had been trampled, wildflowers blooming along the fence line, and birds returning to nest in the trees. Life, she realized, had a way of healing itself just as people did. Yet beneath her calm exterior, Margaret couldn't shake the lingering fear that this wasn't truly over. The gang's leaders were in custody, but their followers remained at large, scattered shadows lurking on the edges of the community. Michael shared her unease. Though he had spent years navigating danger zones overseas, nothing had prepared him for the emotional toll of protecting his own home. The nights were hardest. Even with the farm secured by cameras, alarms, and neighborhood patrols, Michael found himself lying awake, listening for sounds of trouble. His mind raced with questions. Would the remaining gang members retaliate? Could they ever fully trust that the threat was gone? He pushed these thoughts aside during the day, focusing instead on rebuilding what had been destroyed. But at night, when silence enveloped the farm, doubt crept in like an unwelcome guest. To keep busy, Michael threw himself into repairing the property. He rebuilt the chicken coop, replacing its splintered wood with sturdy new planks. He mended fences, cleared debris from the fields, and helped Margaret replant her ruined crops. Neighbors pitched in too, bringing tools, seeds, and offers of assistance. Some came simply to sit on the porch with Margaret, sharing stories of their own struggles and victories. These visits reminded Michael how deeply rooted his mother was in the community, a living testament to resilience and hope. Watching her laugh and swap recipes with friends, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about reclaiming land. It was about restoring faith in the future, but the scars ran deep. Many families who had fled during the worst of the gang's attacks were hesitant to return, fearing retaliation. Others had sold their properties under duress, unable to endure the constant harassment. The landscape bore witness to these losses. Abandoned barns sagging under the weight of neglect, empty houses overrun with weeds and fields left fallow. Margaret often stood at the edge of her property, gazing out at the once thriving farms, now reduced to ghostly remnants. "It breaks my heart," she admitted to Michael one evening. "So much history, wasted." Determined to prevent further destruction, Michael expanded his efforts beyond their immediate surroundings. He worked tirelessly to strengthen the Neighborhood Watch program, organizing regular meetings and training sessions. Volunteers learned how to document suspicious activity, use security equipment, and communicate effectively with law enforcement. Michael also collaborated with local officials to establish a legal defense fund, providing financial support to families targeted by similar threats. Slowly but surely, the community began to rebuild, not just physically but emotionally. Still, the specter of the gang loomed large. Rumors spread of rogue members regrouping in nearby towns, plotting revenge against those who had exposed them. Late one night, Michael received a chilling message via an anonymous tip line. "You think you've won? This isn't over." The words sent a shiver down his spine, but he refused to let fear dictate his actions. Instead, he doubled down on security measures, installing additional cameras and upgrading the farm's perimeter defenses. He also reached out to federal authorities, urging them to investigate the gang's connections to the real estate development company. Evidence suggested that higher-ups were still orchestrating illegal activities, using shell corporations to mask their involvement. Margaret, meanwhile, channeled her energy into nurturing the land and fostering unity among her neighbors. She hosted gatherings at the farm, inviting people to share meals and celebrate small victories. One such event became particularly memorable: a harvest festival where families brought dishes made from produce grown on their farms. Tables groaned under the weight of cornbread, fried chicken, collard greens, and sweet potato pies. Children laughed as they chased each other through the fields while adults swapped stories around bonfires. For the first time in months, there was a sense of normalcy, of joy unburdened by fear. During the festival, Margaret addressed the crowd, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "This land has seen hard times before," she said, gesturing to the field stretching behind her. "Our ancestors fought to build something here, to create a legacy worth passing down. We owe it to them, and to ourselves, to keep fighting. Not with violence, but with courage, determination, and love." Her words resonated deeply, drawing cheers and applause from the attendees. Michael watched proudly from the sidelines, realizing that his mother's quiet strength had inspired not just him, but an entire community. As autumn gave way to winter, the pace of life slowed, giving everyone time to reflect. Margaret spent long hours indoors, knitting blankets and baking pies, finding solace in simple pleasures. Michael used the downtime to research sustainable farming practices, determined to make the farm more resilient against future challenges. Together, they planned improvements, installing solar panels to reduce dependency on external power sources, creating water reservoirs to safeguard against droughts, and planting native species to attract pollinators. Each project was a step toward ensuring the farm's survival, no matter what storms might come. Yet even as they looked forward, memories of the past lingered. Margaret often spoke of her parents and grandparents whose sacrifices had paved the way for her to inherit the farm. She recounted stories of sharecropping days, when every penny earned was saved for the dream of owning land. Michael listened, intently, absorbing these tales like pieces of a puzzle that completed his understanding of their family's journey. He began documenting their history, writing letters to preserve Margaret's recollections for future generations. "Someday," he told her, "your great-grandchildren will read these and know exactly where they came from." By spring, the farm was thriving once again. New crops sprouted in neat rows, Chickens clucked happily in their repaired coop, and wildflowers painted the fields in vibrant hues. The scars of the previous year remained visible, patches of uneven grass, faded burn marks on fence posts, but they served as reminders of resilience rather than defeat. Margaret and Michael welcomed visitors regularly, hosting educational tours for schools and community groups. They explained how they had fought back against intimidation, emphasizing the importance of standing together in the face of adversity. One afternoon, as Margaret sat on the porch shelling peas, a young girl approached her shyly. "Are you the lady who stood up to the bad guys?" she asked, wide-eyed with admiration. Margaret chuckled, setting down her bowl. "I guess I am," she replied, "but I didn't do it alone. My son helped me, and so did our neighbors. Sometimes, all it takes is believing you can win." The girl nodded thoughtfully before running off to join her friends, leaving Margaret smiling softly. Moments like these reaffirmed her belief in the power of storytelling, not just to preserve history but to inspire change. As she glanced at Michael working in the distance, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Their battle had tested them, in ways neither could have imagined, but it had also strengthened their bond and deepened their commitment to justice. Unbeknownst to them, however, another chapter was about to unfold. While the gang's leaders languished in jail, whispers of discontent echoed among their former associates. A new figure had emerged, a cunning strategist with ties to the same development company that had fueled the initial conflict. This person operated differently, preferring subtlety over brute force, manipulation over direct confrontation. And though Margaret and Michael had weathered countless storms, they soon realized that some battles are fought not with fists or weapons but with cunning and patience. As summer approached, strange occurrences began cropping up again, letters arriving without stamps, vehicles idling near the property late at night, and unfamiliar faces appearing at community events. At first, Margaret dismissed them as coincidences, unwilling to believe the nightmare could resurface. But Michael, ever vigilant, noticed patterns emerging. Someone was watching them, studying their routines, testing their defenses. It was clear. The fight for the Williams farm was far from over. Yet neither Margaret nor Michael faltered. They had faced worse before, armed with nothing but their wits, their love for each other, and their unshakable determination to protect their legacy. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would meet them head-on, side by side. After all, the Williams family had always been defined not by the hardships they endured, but by the way they rose above them. And this time would be no different. The arrival of summer brought with it a deceptive calm, like the stillness before a storm. Margaret and Michael noticed subtle changes in their surroundings, small signs that suggested trouble was brewing once again. Anonymous letters began appearing in their mailbox, unsigned but filled with veiled threats. Vehicles would park on the edge of their property at odd hours, their occupants watching silently from tinted windows. At first, Margaret tried to brush these incidents aside, telling herself it was paranoia lingering from the previous year's ordeal. But Michael knew better. His military instincts told him this wasn't mere coincidence. Someone was testing them, probing for weaknesses. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Michael sat on the porch with his laptop, reviewing security footage from the past week. He had installed additional cameras after the last round of suspicious activity, ensuring every inch of the farm was monitored. As he scrolled through hours of recording, something caught his eye. A black sedan parked half a mile down the road, its license plate obscured by mud. The car appeared in multiple clips over several days, always at different times, but never moving. Whoever was behind the wheel clearly didn't want to be noticed, but they weren't careful enough. Michael zoomed in on the image, studying the vehicle's make and model. Then he cross-referenced it with databases accessible through his military contacts. Within hours, he had a name: Victor Langston, a former real estate developer turned consultant for shady corporate deals. Langston was known for his ability to manipulate people in situations without leaving a trace, often operating under layers of legal loopholes. Unlike Jackson and his gang, who relied on brute force, Langston preferred psychological warfare, planting seeds of doubt, creating divisions and exploiting vulnerabilities until his targets crumbled under pressure. Margaret listened intently as Michael explained what he had uncovered. Her face remained calm, though her hands trembled slightly as she sipped her tea. "So this man thinks he can scare us into giving up?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling beneath. "The surface, no," Michael replied firmly. "He doesn't think we'll give up easily. That's why he's taking his time trying to wear us down. But we're not going to let him win." With renewed determination, Michael devised a counter-strategy, drawing on both his military training and lessons learned during the earlier conflict. He focused on 3 key areas: fortifying their defenses, gathering evidence, and rallying community support. He upgraded the farm's security system, adding facial recognition software to the cameras and installing panic buttons throughout the property. If anyone breached their perimeter, authorities would be alerted instantly. He also reached out to neighbors, urging them to remain vigilant and report any unusual activity. Together they formed a network of communication, sharing information in real time via encrypted messaging apps. Meanwhile, Margaret took charge of documenting everything. She kept detailed records of each incident, the dates, times, and descriptions of suspicious vehicles or individuals. She even began writing letters to local officials, demanding greater protection for rural landowners. Her words carried weight, not just because of her age and experience, but because of the respect she commanded within the community. When she spoke, people listened. Langston's tactics grew more insidious. Instead of outright intimidation, he spread rumors designed to sow discord among farmers. Whispers circulated about Margaret planning to sell her land secretly, or Michael using aggressive measures to drive others off their properties. Some neighbors fell prey to these lies, questioning whether the Williams family truly had their best interests at heart. Tensions rose, threatening to fracture the unity Michael and Margaret had worked so hard to build. But Margaret refused to let falsehoods divide them. She organized another gathering at the farm, inviting everyone, from longtime friends to skeptical newcomers, to sit together and talk openly. Standing on the porch where she had addressed the harvest festival months earlier, she looked out at the crowd with quiet authority. "I've lived long enough to know that fear is a powerful weapon," she began, her voice carrying across the yard. "It makes us doubt ourselves, our neighbors, and even our own hearts. But I'm here to tell you that we are stronger than fear. We've faced worse than this, and we've come out on top." Her speech struck a chord. One by one, attendees stood up to share their own experiences, dispelling the rumors and reaffirming their commitment to standing united. By the end of the evening, the atmosphere had shifted from suspicion to solidarity. Langston's attempts to isolate the Williams family had backfired spectacularly. Still, the battle was far from over. Langston escalated his efforts, employing lawyers to challenge the legality of certain farming practices and filing nuisance complaints against Margaret and Michael. Each accusation required time, energy, and resources to refute, draining them emotionally and financially. Yet Michael approached these challenges methodically, treating them like missions with clear objectives. He consulted with attorneys, gathered documentation proving their compliance with regulations, and countered false claims with irrefutable evidence. Every victory, no matter how small, strengthened their resolve. The turning point came unexpectedly. One night, while reviewing security footage, Michael spotted Langston himself visiting the gang members still imprisoned for their crimes. The visit lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough to confirm what Michael had suspected all along. Langston was orchestrating a larger scheme, using the gang as pawns to achieve his goals. Armed with this discovery, Michael contacted federal investigators, providing them with the footage and connecting the dots between Langston, the gang, and the real estate development company. The investigation unfolded swiftly. Authorities uncovered a trail of corruption leading straight to the top of the organization. Documents revealed illegal land acquisitions, forged contracts, and bribes paid to local officials. Langston's carefully constructed facade crumbled under scrutiny, exposing him as the mastermind behind years of exploitation and harassment. Arrest warrants were issued, and within weeks Langston found himself facing charges ranging from racketeering to conspiracy. News of his arrest spread quickly, sparking outrage and relief in equal measure. Local media covered the story extensively, highlighting the courage of Margaret and Michael in standing up to such powerful adversaries. Their farm became a symbol of resistance, not just against greed and corruption, but against the erosion of values that defined rural communities. People traveled from neighboring counties to see the place where ordinary citizens had triumphed over extraordinary odds. As autumn returned to Georgia, bringing crisp air and golden leaves, life on the Williams farm settled into a rhythm of renewal. Damaged fences were mended, crops flourished, and laughter echoed once more through the fields. Margaret and Michael hosted a final gathering of the season, inviting everyone who had supported them throughout the ordeal. Tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes, and music drifted lazily through the air as families danced and celebrated. During the festivities, Margaret pulled Michael aside, her eyes shining with pride. "You did good, son," she said, softly. "Not just for me, but for all of us. You showed them what it means to stand your ground." Michael smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We did it together, Mom. You taught me how to fight, not with fists but with heart, and that's a lesson I'll carry for the rest of my life." In the months that followed, Margaret and Michael continued working to preserve their legacy. They established a non-profit organization dedicated to protecting rural landowners from predatory practices, offering legal assistance, advocacy, and education. Schools began incorporating their story into curriculums, teaching students about resilience, justice, and the importance of community. The Williams farm transformed into a living museum of sorts, welcoming visitors eager to learn about its history and the battles fought to defend it. Though scars remained, both on the land and in their memories, they served as reminders of strength rather than defeat. Margaret and Michael had weathered storms that would have broken lesser spirits, emerging not just unscathed but emboldened. Their journey had tested them in ways neither could have anticipated, but it had also deepened their bond and reinforced their belief in the power of perseverance. As winter approached, blanketing the fields in frost, Margaret stood on her porch, gazing out at the land she had fought so fiercely to protect. Beside her, Michael snapped photos of the sunset, capturing the beauty of a moment hard won. Neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. They had proven that some fights are worth every sacrifice, and that love, determination, and unity can overcome even the greatest odds. The Williams farm, once threatened with destruction, now stood as a monument to hope, resilience, and the enduring spirit of those who refused to surrender. And as long as Margaret and Michael drew breath, it would continue to thrive, a testament to the power of standing firm in the face of adversity.